Right, hello. My name is Oliver Weeks. I'm the curator of Earth Sciences here at the Yorkshire Natural History Museum. I'm a paleontologist. I have a master's degree in paleontology and evolution from the University of Bristol. And my master's project was actually related to the evolution of whales, but I'm not really going to be talking about my master's project today. So first of all, let's have a look at what are whales? So defining terms a little bit. So when I say whales in this lecture, I'm going to be talking about anything that has the name whale. So like blue whales, sperm whales, grey whales, killer whales, things like that, even though killer whales are technically dolphins. But I'm also including dolphins and porpoises in this. So that entire group of all called whales. I might also use the word cetaceans as well, and that is technically the scientific word for whales. And then a couple of little facts there. There's 94 living species, and many more that are extinct, and they're the largest animals that have ever lived, even bigger than any of the dinosaurs. So where do whales fit in with the animal family tree? So they are mammals. But they are most closely related within the mammals to things like deer, sheep, cows, and camels and giraffes. But their closest living relatives are actually the hippopotamuses. But it is kind of a bit of a coincidence they both live in water a lot of the time. They evolved that ecology separately. So when we're looking at the fossil record, and we're looking for the ancestors of whales, we're going to be looking for something that looks a little bit like a deer, but also with some key features that we recognize in whales today. But before that, we're just going to have a little tangent onto how we know that something used to live on land and has gone back into the water. So I'm going to use the example of early fish evolution here. And we're talking about how to tell that a tetrapod, how to tell that something is a tetrapod and used to live on land has gone into water. And well, we're gonna use I get a hand from our volunteer, Mr. Bones. So if we look here at the bottom of this diagram at the end, we've got the zebrafish, and those have kind of ray-like fins, and the bones don't look anything like the bones in our limbs today. But if you look a little bit further along this evolutionary tree here, you see that you're getting slightly more fleshy fins that have more larger bones in them. And you see that red bone at the back there is broadly the same kind of bone as this bone here, the humerus bone. And then you can see the yellow bones here, got the radius and ulna, and that gets more and more obvious as you get closer to modern tetrapods. We also have the fingers that develop more obviously into, well, fingers as you get to Acanthostega. But they kind of have 8 finger bones. A little bit too many, I think. But they settled eventually onto the 5 finger bones that we have today. Just hooked myself on that. So if you look at these limbs here, these are all of marine mammals. So we've got seals and sea lions, dugong and manatee, and 4 different whales here. And they've got a shoulder bone included, so just ignore that top bone. But they all have humerus, radius and ulna, and a bunch of kind of finger bones. You can also see this in the ichthyosaurs as well. So these are marine reptiles that were around at the same time as the dinosaurs. And you see the large top bone, 2 smaller bones, and then a bunch of fingers. They've gone a little bit crazy with their fingers in the ichthyosaurs. And the same is true for the plesiosaurs, these 2 up here as well. Let's put this back down here. And you can see some of these in our gallery next door. So this is basically to show that, like, you can tell that a tetrapod has returned to water. It's not basically it's not a fish, and that's how we kind of first would realize that the whales were at one point living on land. So let's get back to what I was saying about that's the wrong way. A kind of deer-like creature with some whale features. So this is what we think to be the first ancestral whale. It's a little guy called Indohyus. It lived in the Eocene of India, so about 50 million years ago, and it had denser bones than you would expect from other land animals that lived around that time. And that means that it was very likely eating things from the bottom of streams and rivers. It helps to allow animals to walk along the bottom of these bodies of water. They also have chemistry. The chemistry of their bones is consistent with something that was living in fresh water and something that was eating vegetation. So it's an animal that's already going into a sort of aquatic environment, but it doesn't look very much like a whale at this point. It's looking very much like almost like a ratty beaver type thing. But you can see at the bottom, the key feature that marks this as an ancestral whale is what we call, what is here, the involucrum of the tympanic bulla. And what that is a thickening of bone around the inner ear, which is very typical of whales. I've got an example here. This is from another ancient whale, not quite as old as this, about 15 million years old. It's a very strange fossil. I'll pass that round at the end. And Indohyus has that, and that is the feature that really shows that this is the first true, well, not first true whale, but the first step on the evolution to whales. The next one is Pachycetus, and it's living about the same time in the same place, and we're finding it in river deposits. So it's having the same ecology as Indohyus, and it has the same sorts of features. It's got those very deer-like limb bones, and it also has the tympanic bulla, like I mentioned with Indohyus. However, it's got shearing teeth, and it's taken on this more elongate structure to its skull, which is showing that it's actually changing the way that it's feeding to be a lot more like the typical whale. So after that, there is I'm going to call these the early archaeocetes. I've grouped them all in together, and I'll go on to why I grouped them in together a bit later. But they are, again, a lot of them occurring in the India and Pakistan at the same time, again, Eocene. And there's 3 main groups: the Ambulocetes, that's one up in this top corner; the Remingtonocetes, the one that you can see in the background here; and the Protocetids, that one in the bottom corner. And there's a couple of skeletons as well of the Protocetids. They are, at this point, fully aquatic. They can't actually very easily go back onto land. And the first 2 groups are mostly found in rivers and coastal areas and around India and Pakistan. There's one that's found in Africa, but it's a little bit of an outlier. And that shows that those are they're staying to these sorts of areas where they first evolved in and not moving out into the open oceans. But the Protocetids are found worldwide. So shows that these are now starting to actually venture out into the open oceans. Maybe not quite into the fully deep waters yet, but they are marine animals at this point. And you can see that they're getting more elongate, more slender, hydrodynamic. The Remingtonocetids, it's speculated that from some of their features that it might have been living a little bit like otters, going through kind of murky waters, that the Ambulocetids are probably some sort of ambush predator with the eyes on top of the head. So got a broad mix of different animals evolving at the time. And the reason why I lumped them all in together is because they were all living at the same time. So if you were to look at whale evolution, how it's sort of depicted in diagrams a lot of the time, it's this kind of linear progress from the Pachycetids through to the Basilosaurids, which we'll come on to later. But they're actually not, it's not a strict progression of Pachycetid to Ambulocetid to Remingtonocetid. Evolution is more of a branching process than is shown here. And which kind of makes sense, because if you get, as a species, there's two different populations within that species. There maybe end up in two different environments. One environment is one population adapts to one environment differently to the way that it would adapt to another environment, and you get different features evolving in each group, and that happens over and over again. And that first group that evolved, that environment doesn't really go away, so that creature is still well adapted to that environment and will persist through, like we see up here, these sort of overlapping timelines here, and they will live at the same time. And this is a little bit like sea lions and seals today, because they evolved from the same common ancestor and to pretty similar conditions as well. They're both things that used to live on land, and they are moving back into the water. But they have different features, and sea lions are actually a little bit more gracile on land. Not very much, but they are a little bit better at moving on land than seals are. And you might get, from, if you just had the skeleton of a seal, you might think that it was more well adapted to living in the water than a sea lion is. But they're both living at the same time from the same common ancestor, so it's very similar to different things, different early whales living at the same time. So that's the Protocetes, and you can see at the bottom the Basilosaurids are coming in. So this is the next group, the Basilosaurids. Got a little bit of a gasp there because they are really, really cool. This is when whales first get huge. The largest of the Basilosaurids get up to about 20 meters long. They're getting up to somewhere in the region of 15 tons, and they start to become major players in marine ecosystems. And this is because there's a big niche that has just been absent of anything since the extinction of the dinosaurs. The large marine reptiles, the mosasaurs and the plesiosaurs, both went extinct at the end of the age of the dinosaurs. There's been nothing around until 43-ish million years ago, except for sharks, and they don't really fill this like big predator niche. They're kind of still the same size as sharks today, maybe a little bit smaller. So the whales come in and they take over this like huge predator niche. But it's not just the huge Basilosaurus, it's also things like Dorodon as well. They're about the size of a large modern dolphin. Still bigger than most of the sharks as well, though. they're not very ecologically diverse. They're all doing a similar thing. They're all eating their prey in the same way, which is sort of biting. And we'll get onto why that's important later. They've not got echolocation yet, and they're not doing any of the things that the huge whales today do. So from the Eocene onwards, this is when we start to get the split of the two main groups of whales, which are the toothed whales and the baleen whales. So the toothed whales are all these ones on this side of the screen, including the sperm whales and the killer whales, and all the beaked whales as well. And the baleen whales are the huge ones over there, like the blue whale, the right whale, grey whale. And they have a very diverse range of different sensory and dietary capabilities. For example, we have echolocation in the toothed whales, and there is filter feeding in the baleen whales. The toothed whales also have a technique called suction feeding, and it is basically creating a semi-vacuum in their jaws, with their jaws, to draw in prey instead of actually actively biting the prey out of the water. And that is a big. They're actually using the physics of water to capture their prey. But as you'll see later, the early baleen whales also used that technique. We're also starting to get smaller again in the toothed whales. They get really huge as well in the baleen whales. So they've got a huge diversity of sizes as well as ecologies. I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution. Well, not really going to touch much on the toothed whales. There's some really cool whales, toothed whales, like the Leviathan at that end, and that is a macroraptorial sperm whale. So it's a sperm whale with huge teeth, and it was probably eating other whales at the time. It rivaled Megalodon, if you've heard of Megalodon. At the same time, you also got these other types of dolphin-like creatures with huge, long snouts, squalodontids, I think they're called. And then you've got really weird ones like this. They look like walruses. It's called Odobenocetops. Yeah, very strange. You'd think it was a walrus if you saw it somewhere. But it's an odd toothed whale. But I find more interesting the evolution of baleen whales. So baleen whales are some of the strangest animals that we've got around today. And you might think, how did that evolution come about? So I've got a sort of simplified diagram that goes through some of the transitional fossils that we found. But essentially, what we've got to evolve is the baleen plates, which are keratinous plates made of the same thing as sort of nails and things like that sift out prey from the water. So they engulf huge amounts of water and then sift out the usually krill, small organisms in the water, from the water. And so they're able to eat huge quantities of food with in one movement. And that's how they get so huge. So to do that, obviously, you need the baleen plates. They also lose their teeth. And also, a crazy thing that they do, that modern whales do, is they actually have their bottom jaws, which in us is completely sealed. And in modern whales, they actually have an elastic connection between the two bottom jaws, which allows them to expand the size of their, we call an oral cavity. So we have to lose that connection between the bottom jaws in the evolution of whales, and also obviously increase the size of the oral cavity. So as we're going through the evolution of whales, we start to get the basilosaurs, which I've covered, but Chironodon and Mammalodontids, they are starting to increase the volume of their oral cavity, and they're also shortening their mandibular symphysis, which is that connection at the on the bottom jaws. And you can see that comparing the jaws at the bottom there. I'll do a little point here. That area there, that's all where it would connect, and on that jaw there, and it's comparing it to that kind of orangey jaw at the back. And it's very much longer in early basilosaurids. And at this point, you've got biting still and some simple sieving, but it's possible these early whales could have used suction feeding as well. As you get onto the Aetiocetids, you've completely lost the connection between the bottom jaws, and it is fully elastic at this point, but we've still got teeth. So it is using suction feeding and probably some simple sieving out of water, but without any baleen plates and still with teeth. So later on in the evolution with Myobelina, they finally lose their teeth completely, and eventually with Eomystacetids, they gain baleen plates. And finally they're onto the modern kind of baleen whale feeding mechanism with baleen filtering, baleen sieving. And then we've got the modern whales here, which evolve later on in some of the groups, a thing called ram feeding, which is essentially just passively moving forward with your mouth open and using that to sieve out the prey from the water. And that's in things like bowhead whales. Move on to, so it's just a little panel with a lot of the diversity of the whales at that time. All of these were covered in the previous slide. I think we've got Chironodon at that top corner, Mammalodon there, the bottom left is Planocetus, and we've got Eomystacetids at the bottom here, which looks very much like modern whales. A little bit thinner than you'd expect, but basically you've got a modern whale type thing. So when I first did this similar talk to this last year, a new paper had just come out about early whale evolution with these new species, Chironodon planiforms and Chironodon newtonanorum. And these are the early sort of maybe possibly suction feeding whales, which was kind of cool that it came out in the same week. But since then, we've also had the discovery of the largest of the Basiloperocetus, which is that huge one at that end, and that could get up to about 20 meters, which is the same size as some of the other longest basilosaurs at least. But you can see the vertebrae are absolutely huge. They're like really thick, and that is what we call pachyostosclerosis, and that is a thickening and densening of the bones, and that is similar to what we see in manatees today, which has led people to speculate that it was actually living a little bit like modern manatees. So instead of the 15 tons of other basilosaurs at the time, like Basilosaurus, it's speculated that it could grow from 85 tons up to 340 tons, which, if you know how big blue whales are clocking at, that is heavier than a blue whale. Blue whales are between 130 and 150 tons. I think that perhaps the lower estimates are probably the more accurate ones because of the structure of the bones are more like manatees. So when they were estimating it, they used manatee-like reconstructions for the 85-ton range. So that would be lighter than a blue whale. But when you're comparing it to the averages of other whales at around today, it'd probably be about the second or third heaviest whale of all time, which is crazy for something so early in the evolution of whales. And then this one, Tootsitas, a really, really tiny whale, and it's about 2.5 meters long and 180 kilograms. So only as heavy as two people, and that's even smaller than some of its ancestors, the Protocetids. And you can see a comparison between the two down here. There's the huge Palaeontology and the really, really tiny Tootsitas there. It's really cool. But I think it's possibly worth saying that it's really cool to live at the same time as, because this might be possibly the heaviest whale to ever live. But for now, blue whale still holds the title officially. And it's really cool to live at the same time as the largest animal that's ever lived. You think back and you think there's the dinosaurs, and they are spectacular, they're really huge, and you think that's the time of the huge animals. But we're living at the same time as the largest animal that's ever lived, which I think is pretty cool. So with that, I'll end on the customary whale joke. Yeah, I know it's technically a fluke, but you know. So yeah, got any questions?